Welcome back to Round the Cauldron, where we talk theology, philosophy, and everyday life as a modern witch. Today, I'm going to be talking about how I make my correspondences personal, what can and can't be personalized, and exactly how I do it. If you're ready to hop into the show, grab some coffee, pull up a seat, and join me round the cauldron. Today I'm going to talk about making your correspondences personal, because sometimes the common correspondences just don't work for us, and there is a way that we can make them work for us. I do have two announcements though. The first one is that I am still planning my giveaway. I've got a few things in the works, so that should be announced, I think, on November 30th. So coming up soon. The second announcement is that I am finally in the process of editing my book. Now, if you didn't already know, I am writing a book/workbook on shadow work. I've talked about shadow work before. I think shadow work is a very important part of any spiritual practice. It's even a good thing for anyone else to do who is not spiritual. And I am finally editing, so I'm hoping to have that process done by either the end of the month or early December, and as soon as it's available for pre-order, I will let you know. Okay, so I talked about correspondences when I spoke about common correspondences of the elements a couple of weeks ago, and I had the idea in the middle of filming to create another video/podcast episode about how to make correspondences work for you. How can we personalize them to make your witchcraft and your magic more personal? Because sometimes those correspondences just don't click with us, and they are based either on someone else's tradition, be it Wicca or any other sort of witchcraft practice. And I think it's important for us to be able to realize that if we're not part of a tradition that tells us, how we have to view the correspondences, what they all mean, and how we use the elements in our witchcraft, we can make those personal so that it works better for us. If we don't feel connected to what we're doing, and if we don't fully believe in what we're doing and what we're saying and what we're using, then I think that can really hinder your magical experience. Now, I need to say right out the gate, I am not part of any tradition. Everything that I'm going to be talking about as far as making the correspondences personal for you does not apply if you are in a specific tradition. And this is because traditions within witchcraft have their own sets of rules. They have their own correspondences and things that they believe and do. I cannot speak for them. I can't speak for any tradition because I'm not part of a tradition, and I'm not going to speak about something that I have no experience with. With that being said, I also need to make sure that you know that I am an animist, and my views on correspondences are going to be colored by the fact that I am an animist, and I am viewing correspondences through that lens in my witchcraft practice. Now, if you don't know what a correspondence in witchcraft is basically the meaning that an item or ingredient or concept has. So in my elements video, I covered common correspondences for each element: earth, air, fire, and water. Each one is given a common correspondence, meaning each one means or works with or works in a very specific way. Anything in any New Age practice also has correspondences. For that, I'm talking things like crystals, right? Crystals aren't necessarily a witchcraft practice themselves. Crystals are generally considered New Age, but you can use crystals in your witchcraft. Like, I'm not saying that you can't. But crystals are given correspondences. Herbs, plants, flowers, and even different celestial bodies like the moon, the sun, even landforms like oceans and lakes and mountains and rivers and things like that. Colors are even given correspondences, and different fragrances, different scents are given correspondences. And a lot of times the correspondences are similar through people's different practices, but I have found in my own practice that sometimes what someone says or what a book says or somebody on the internet says something means just doesn't work for me. And I want to talk about my process for making these correspondences work for me, because one thing might mean something to someone else and it could mean something completely different to me. So when you're working with things in magic, correspondences are important. Often I find that correspondence isn't necessarily the right word, especially if I'm speaking about something that has a spirit, like plants and animals and trees and flowers. For those types of magical ingredients, I tend to think of it more as their strengths. What are they good at? And in turn, then we can look at what they're not good at, their weaknesses or their flaws. I think it's really important to have an understanding of why things are given specific meaning, why things are said to be really good for one thing and not so good for another, because it adds a deeper level of understanding to what you're doing. And I think that deeper level of understanding can really enhance your magical practice, because I am a big believer in the why. Why do we do things the way that we do? Why are rose petals good for love? And why is mint good for money? You know? And so for me, when I understand those different correspondences that are given to plants and stuff, it helps me understand what I'm doing and how it works. It's not necessary, I don't think, to really understand every single piece of every single thing that you're using. Yes, every ingredient in a spell should have a meaning. I don't think you should just throw things all together and say, hey, here we go, let's just put it all together and see what happens. I think that's very careless and reckless, but that's a different discussion. I also think it's really important for eclectic witches, which is outside of a tradition, to know how to make these correspondences personal, because what we see in books, and let me tell you, the majority of books out there on witchcraft are Wicca-centric that I have found. There are plenty of really good ones out there that aren't, but the majority of books out there that talk about correspondences I have found are Wicca-centric, and I'm not Wiccan. Lots of other witches out there aren't Wiccan. So I don't think that we should be taking our correspondences and getting our information specifically from one style of book. I think that learning how to make the correspondences work for you is important, and that's why I want to talk about it. I guess that was a super long introduction to the topic, but oh well. I need to discuss really quick from my perspective the different things that can and can't be personalized when it comes to correspondences and spell ingredients. This is my opinion. This is how it works for me. So if it doesn't resonate with you, then it doesn't resonate with you. I'm sure if it doesn't resonate with you, then some of the things that I say here could still be helpful to you. But I need to say that for me, in my practice, there are specific things that cannot be given personal correspondences. And these are going to be things that have a spirit of their own. So different plants and animals and their bones and other parts. Different landforms I don't think can be given personalized correspondences. And what I mean by landforms, I don't mean the idea of mountains or the idea of oceans or rivers or whatever. I'm speaking very specifically about like the Rocky Mountains or the river that is in my county. Very specific locations, and even not specific locations, have spirits that guard them. They have spirits within them. So I don't think that I can just march myself up to the Mississippi River and stick my hands in it and say the Mississippi River is going to help me find the love of my life because the Mississippi River corresponds with love. Okay, that doesn't make sense for me at all. And I don't believe that specific correspondences can be given to places like that because they already have a spirit. If you want to know what a specific river can help you with, ask it. If it doesn't want to help you, leave it alone. Okay, we don't want to be stepping on the toes of spirits. I mean, I don't anyway. So for me, the different things that can be given personal correspondences are going to be like directions. North, south, east, west, what have you. Up, down, left, right. You know, they can all be given personal correspondences. Then you have colors. Did I already say colors? I don't remember. But colors can be given personal correspondences, as well as the elements and different scents. There's probably a bunch of other things that can be given personal correspondences, but those are going to be some of the ones that I'm focusing on today, because what I have to say about making those correspondences personal can generally be applied to anything else. So when you're looking at how to make things personal for you, there are a couple different things that you can do. The first one is obviously ask yourself, how does it make you feel? What does it make you think of? Do you have any past experience that might influence the way you see or handle this particular thing? Also look at your surroundings. You know, if you're trying to come up with personal correspondences for the directions, look at what's around you. Look at your home. What's in the area of your house? What's in the different directions? What about your state or your country? Maybe you're on an island. Maybe you associate all of the directions with water because you're literally surrounded by water, right? So it just takes a little bit of thought, and it's not as complicated as you might think it is. You may also want to just meditate on it for a while. Just sit with it. And if it's an object, hold it in your hands, feel it, be mindful of the texture and what it looks like, how it smells, what its use is, like what its practical use is, and then see if the object contains a spirit. If the object contains a spirit, ask the spirit what its strengths are. What is it good at? What is it not good at? There are a lot of different ways that you can make these work for you. And it's not necessarily hard to explain because it's not complicated. It's not as complex as some people would think. You know, you think of making things your own, and if you're like me, you might draw blank at first, which that's totally fine because we're not used to being able to make things our own in witchcraft, especially when everyone is obsessed with reading the latest book or watching the latest YouTube video or listening to the latest podcast. We always tend to want to have the information given to us. And this is true outside of witchcraft. So making these correspondences personal for you is going to take some thought. But that's basically all it takes, is you just sitting down and thinking about it and thinking of the first thing that comes to your mind. Write it down. Journal about it. Don't ask yourself or other people, am I doing this right? Because when you're making correspondences personal for you, there probably isn't a wrong way that you can do it. This is obviously going to depend on what you believe, and I would not give correspondences to a plant or an animal because for me, that is the wrong way to do it for my practice and my beliefs. But we can't always have the information spoon-fed to us because that leads to stagnation in our practice, it leads to stagnation in our beliefs, and it doesn't give us the ability to really flex our brain muscle and think for ourselves and really understand the different ways that we can practice and the different things that we can believe. Okay, so since it's not complicated, and I feel like if I just keep trying to explain it, I'm just going to talk myself in circles and maybe even get confusing, because that's what tends to happen. I want to walk through making two different types of correspondences personal. And I'm going to use myself as the example through my own personal experience. So I want to talk about color first, and then I want to talk about the elements, or not the elements, the directions. I picked a color that I absolutely just hate. Okay, I don't like the color yellow. I have never liked the color yellow. I just don't like it. All right. So we have yellow. I pulled some correspondences for yellow from Wikipedia. I'll leave that link in the description and in the show notes. Wikipedia is a good source for common information, and I think it's a good resource to get you started. I wouldn't necessarily use it as the be-all end-all because I don't think that exists, but it's a good resource for someone that might need a push in the right direction or just a little bit of help. So I pulled the correspondences for the color yellow from Wikipedia. Yellow is commonly attributed to the element of air. It is commonly attributed to the direction of east, and the tools associated with air are wands, swords, and athames. And then Wikipedia lists a bunch of different keywords that are associated with the color yellow, and I'm just going to read a couple of them, but I'll put the rest of them on the screen for those watching here on YouTube. So some of the correspondences that Wikipedia has listed are communication, travel, astral projection, spirit communication, protection, telepathy, optimism, and mental clarity. Now, that's not the whole list, as I said, so make sure you check out the link in the description and in the show notes if you want to see more of that. But those are common attributions for the color of yellow. My experience with the color yellow does not, what am I trying to say? My experience with the color yellow makes me really just not like the color. There's something about yellow that I just find absolutely unappealing. And it doesn't necessarily remind me of, you know, the warm, fuzzy feelings that some people get from the color yellow. Now, I picked yellow because I hate the color, but I also picked it because it is one of those colors that I don't necessarily hold all of the common correspondence beliefs. And this is colored by my experience with the color yellow. Now, I grew up in a city called Bakersfield, California. And anyone familiar with the area will know that Bakersfield is basically a desert. Bakersfield is like 2 hours from LA, and there's no green. I mean, there is green, but most of the stuff there is dead and yellow. So first off, I attribute yellow to home. Yellow for me means home because that's where I was born and raised. I didn't move out of Bakersfield for the first time. Yes, there has been multiple times where I have moved and then came back. I didn't move out of Bakersfield for the first time until I was 19. And, you know, I still have family there. It's where I'm from, and it's just home, no matter how much I don't claim it and how much I don't like it. It's home. So when I think of yellow, I think of dying vegetation. I think of drought. I think of a roughness that you can really only experience if you've lived in a place like Bakersfield. And instead of the normal warm fuzzies that people think of when they think of the color yellow, I am reminded more of an unbearable heat because Bakersfield is hot. And I mean, it's hot in the summer and the fall. It cools off in winter and then starts to get hot again in spring. So it's basically hot for 75% of the year, but it's not a comfortable heat. It is triple digits all day long and only cooling off into the 90s at night, even in the middle of the night when the sun has been gone for hours. Yellow reminds me of unbearable heat. Now, there are some others that are more general. Yellow reminds me of obscurity, of sort of an in-between. It reminds me of the life cycle because of the drought and the barrenness that happens in Bakersfield when there's no rain or when there's no water flowing through the Kern River. Now, yellow does remind me of happiness, but not necessarily joy or an ecstatic happiness. It's more of a happiness of lazing around on a hot summer day or summer vacation and taking those beach trips, because Bakersfield is only about 2 hours from the coast, from places like Pismo and Santa Barbara. You know, those places aren't far away. So while yellow for me has those common attributions, like I do attribute yellow with communication and travel because of the beach trips, it is a more complex color for me because of the obscurity and the drought and the barrenness and the deficiency and the heat that I also associate with that color. And if you listen to my elements episode, you'll know that I don't give elements colors, not usually. And so I don't really associate yellow with any particular element or number or direction or anything like that. So I hope that part made sense in taking a color and really making it your own. If you need help with that, my first suggestion would just be, what does the color remind you of? How do you feel about the color? Because I wrote a whole article on my website about color correspondences and whether they're personal or traditional and the science behind how color makes us feel. I'll leave that in the description and in the show notes if you want to read it. But I think color is extremely personal and is definitely influenced by our experiences. But we've talked about color, and now I want to talk about making the directions personal for you. Because off the top of my head, even though I just covered elements and their directions, it's hard for me to remember like which is which. So I think directions can be made personal too, and you can correspond your directions with whatever elements and attributions based on where you're located, right? So going back to what I said a little bit ago, if you live on an island, you might attribute every single direction to water because you are literally surrounded by water, okay? But I'll use California as an example. Just the whole state, not just a general area, the whole state, okay? So if you look at California on a map, to the west, you have the ocean. That's the Pacific Ocean, if you didn't know. So immediately I would associate west with the element of water. Now on the east side of the state is the Sierra Nevada mountains. So I would associate the direction of east with earth. As far as the element of fire, that one's a little more difficult because it seems like California is always on fire. But if I were doing this for myself and California, I would associate the south with the element of fire because the further south you go, the warmer and hotter it gets. And then that just leaves north being the element of air. So you can do this with basically anywhere. You can do it with your state. You can do it with just your house. So that would get interesting because if you do it for your house, then what happens if you move? Then your directions are going to change to better correspond with your personal experience. So if you live somewhere and to the east of you is a lake, then you might correspond the east with water, right? So it just takes a little bit of thought, and it's really not as complex as you might think it is. All you have to do is think about it and look at your surroundings and maybe meditate on a couple of the more difficult ones, or just sit with it and really think about it and just get a feel for what feels right. Because it shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't be something that you need to spend hours and hours just agonizing over getting it right. Because if you're an eclectic witch, as long as you're not taking from another culture and appropriating something that doesn't belong to you, there is generally not a right and wrong way to do it. I mean, I could sit here and tell you that, yes, for sure, the West is associated with water, and you could just be like, nope, that doesn't work for me. I think personal correspondences are very important for those of us who are eclectic witches, who don't have a specific tradition that we are either tied to or that we choose to follow. So go out, make your correspondences personal for you, and let me know how it works. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Round the Cauldron. I hope it wasn't too complicated of an explanation on how I make my correspondences personal. I think it's really something that if you just try to explain over and over again, it's going to just become more confusing, because I find that for the most simple of things, the more you try to explain it, the more confusing it becomes. So go out, make your correspondences personal, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you, Jess, Rose, Holly, Blue, Hillary, Bonnie, Lee, Angie, Leli, Magical Crafting, Bliss, and anyone else that I didn't mention. If you'd like to help support the show, please feel free to join me over on Patreon at patreon.com/roundthecauldron, where you can get patron exclusive perks and content for as little as $1 a month.